I'm Courtney Layton, continuing our summer ventures here in Plymouth by checking out some historical museums, so let's take a look.
I'm Ted Howington, and I'm the curator of the Roanoke River Lighthouse and Maritime Museum. I have been here at the museum since last September, so I'm relatively a newcomer, but we have some exciting things coming up here at the museum for the rest of the summer and for the rest of the year, and we'd like to have you come and visit us. What we do here at the museum is really celebrate life on the Roanoke River. Plymouth and Washington County has been really tied to the Roanoke for hundreds of years, and we celebrate the people, the places, the things, businesses, everything from fishing to recreational use to wildlife to the Civil War era to the lighthouse, so that's what they'll be able to see, is kind of get a glimpse of life on the river. Sure. What we have here we're very proud of. We have an exact replica of the original Roanoke River Lighthouse, which was at the mouth of the Roanoke River as it empties into the Albemarle Sound. It was built in 1866, the original one, and it lasted for about 20 years and it burned. And it was replaced with a second Roanoke River Lighthouse, and it was destroyed by an ice flow out on the Sound, believe it or not, within a year. And then a third Roanoke River Lighthouse was built, and it lasted until it was decommissioned in 1941. The replica that we have here at the Roanoke River Lighthouse, we give tours of, you're welcome to go into, and it was built and dedicated in 2007. And we're very proud of it, and we'll take you along and show you inside. Well, my background has always been history of one way or another, Southern history, cultural history, and so this just fell right into my wheelhouse. My interest, and it's just an exciting time to be here, to really kind of help build something and to grow something and to build some excitement for what we're trying to do here in Plymouth. One, the people. There's still lots of people that have so many wonderful stories that they experience themselves, or they heard from their grandparents, or stories that have been passed down. And so it's actually the people, and that's what makes history alive. And that's what we try to generate here at the museum.
Do you have a favorite piece in here?
That's like asking a person who their favorite child is. They're all my favorites. But one of them is right behind me here, and it is a modern day dugout canoe that was built by some fishermen up in Janesville area in the 1940s, and it's made out of one solid bald cypress tree. And the techniques that they used for digging out that canoe and creating that canoe for fishing in the 20th century is really not much different than the canoes that the ancient Native Americans were using 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. I have been here at the museum since last September, so I'm relatively a newcomer, but we have some exciting things coming up here at the museum for the rest of the summer and for the rest of the year, and we'd like to have you come and visit us. In addition to the Maritime Museum, we also have a replica of the Roanoke River Lighthouse that was originally built in 1866, and it's set at the mouth of the Roanoke River out on the Albemarle Sound. And we have it open to the public. You can go in, we can give you a tour, and we would love to have you visit it. And if you're a resident of Washington County, we have free admission through the end of June, and we would love to see you.
Hi, I'm Scott Liverman. I'm the curator at the Port of Plymouth Museum here in Plymouth, North Carolina, and we are telling the story of Plymouth's role in the Civil War at this current exhibit. It's a 1923 railroad depot that belonged to the Atlantic coastline. It was a freight depot. The Norfolk and Southern had another depot in Plymouth, but this one was in 1923, and I'm working on an exhibit to show the history of the railroads here in Plymouth as well. So it'll be a future exhibit. Please stop by and see me So my favorite piece of history here at the museum is the destruction of the Albemarle. It's a fascinating story. It's a clandestine story, and it was one that's not well known, and so we invite everyone to come and partake of this not well known story, and we're trying to bring that to life here in Plymouth. Yeah, behind me, the centerpiece of the story of Plymouth's role in the Civil War is the ironclad ship, the CSS Albemarle. Behind me here are models of the ship. We've got one here, this is another one up here. And that picture up there is actually an artist rendition of the sinking of the ship. So I've always had a fascination with history and particularly old objects and things, and so working on finishing up my master's degree, my thesis, I got it from the University of Georgia at Athens in historic preservation. And so that's more of a focus on the built environment, but along with that comes the history and being a historian. So I am coming into my own as far as a historian role, but I know more things about the built environment and how to preserve old buildings and such. But this position opened up while I was finishing my thesis. I was born here originally, and so as I moved back to finish it, this opened up, and it was a perfect career builder opportunity. And I love it here. Yeah, the Washington County Historical Society is a wonderful body, and they do a lot of things for the town of Plymouth. Yeah, so the centerpiece of the story is the CSS ironclad ship, and ironclad ships were an emerging technology prior to the American Civil War. Constructed from 1859 to the early 1890s, the ironclad was developed as a result the vulnerability of wood ships to explosive or incendiary shells. John L. Porter was a prolific designer of warships for both the Union and the Confederate Navy. In his early career in the Union Navy, he designed numerous iron sloops of war, steamships for the fleet. He also designed and submitted to the Navy Department plans and specifications for an ironclad warship, but his idea did not receive much attention in Washington. Although he opposed the secession of Virginia, he kept allegiance to his state and resigned from the U.S. Navy in May of 1861 and quickly began design work for the Confederate Navy. He modified his previous ironclad design and submitted it to the Confederate Secretary of War Stephen R. Mallory on June 24, 1861, which was approved. And as a result, Porter's plans became the standardized design for most of the ironclads laid down during the remainder of the Civil War by the Confederate Navy. The CSS Albemarle and her twin sister ship, the CSS Neuse, which is in Kinston, are two of Porter's ironclads originating in North Carolina. Peter Evans Smith was both a farmer and a gifted inventor who, early in life, became deaf. Prior to the Civil War, Smith made improvements to various railroad equipment as well as maritime inventions such as the lighted buoy. His contributions to the fabrication of the CSS Albemarle were many. He provided a cornfield he owned on the banks of the Roanoke River as part of his Sunnyside homestead near Scotland Neck, North Carolina, to be used as a base of fabrication for the Albemarle. As chief of construction, he invented a new twist drill, which drastically sped up the drilling process. His new drill allowed holes to be bored in iron in 4 minutes, cutting the iron out in shavings instead of powder, which required 20 minutes. And Gilbert Elliott was a Confederate officer and chief contractor of the CSS Albemarle. Born in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, Elliott came from a family of shipbuilders who helped establish Elizabeth City. In the year 1864, at the age of 19, Elliott contracted with the Confederate States of America to build a Porter-class iron ship. The CSS Albemarle was to be fabricated in the cornfield owned by Evans Smith on the banks of the Roanoke. Construction of the CSS Albemarle is a fascinating story. Again, it was built on a cornfield near Scotland Neck, and it was using bits and pieces of machinery and homemade equipment, and it was launched and manned with a crew of roughly 20 local sailors and crew. The ship itself, the CSS Albemarle, the superstructure of the Albemarle was made of 2 layers of wood, one of white oak and another of yellow pine, and measured 158 feet long. Her extreme beam was 35 feet wide, and her depth from gun deck to keel was 9 feet. When launched, she drew 6.5 feet of water, and after being fitted with iron plates and completed, her draft was about 8 feet and weighed 376 tons. Over the 4-inch thick planking were fastened 2 courses of iron plating extending from the knuckle to 4 feet below the deck. Lieutenant Gilbert Elliott had scavenged scrap iron and railroad rails to ensure the required quantity of plates. 2 steam engines of 200 horsepower each with 20-inch cylinders drove 2 propeller shafts that were geared together. Armament consisted of 2 rifled Brook guns mounted on pivot carriages, each gun firing through one of 3 portholes from within each end of the armored shield. The prow for ramming was built of oak, running 18 feet astern on center keelson, solidly bolted and covered to the outside of iron plating 2 inches thick. It tapered to a 4-inch wide edge at the bow. On April 16, 1862, the Confederate Navy Department signed a contract with Elliott to fabricate the Albemarle. And construction of the ironclad began in January of 1863 and continued on during the next war. Caught into battle at Plymouth on April 17, 1864, not all of its iron plating was completed. Portable forges were installed on the deck, accompanied by the remaining iron plates, so that work could continue as the ship headed downriver towards Plymouth. A barge was towed behind to carry extra materials. A number of carpenters and blacksmiths were assembled to continue the work of securing the iron plating. Untried, untested, and unfinished, the mighty ironclad headed towards Plymouth. Because of the river's current, with its many twists and turns, Captain Cook ordered heavy chains to be dragged from the bow when the Albemarle would begin drifting stern first downstream. The ironclad came down the mighty Roanoke River upon one of the highest flood stages that the river had ever seen, allowing her to float over sunken ships placed by Union forces as a blockade. Word of the gunboat's approach reached the Union naval officers stationed in Plymouth, raising an alarm. Heading into battle at Plymouth, the mission of the Albemarle was to clear the river of all Union vessels so that General Robert F. Hoke's troops could storm the forts located there. Aware of her approach, Union Naval Gunboat Commander Charles W. Flusser ordered his flagship, the USS Miami, to be lashed together with another Union gunboat, the USS Southfield, and approached its advance from upriver, attempting to pass on either side of the Albemarle in order to trap her between them. Thus, her first battle was with this small fleet near Plymouth, during which she was successful in ramming the side of and ultimately sinking the Southfield. The oak ram at the prow of the Albemarle came to be lodged some 13 feet into the side of the Southfield, and Captain Cook was unable to extricate the ship. As the Southfield sank, it pulled the bow of the Albemarle down with it, but fortunately for Cook, she rolled over before settling on the riverbed, and this action released the death grip that held the new Confederate ram. The Albemarle sank the USS Southfield in 120 seconds. Moments later, the commanding officer, Captain Flusser of the Union Navy, was killed by a rebounding shell which he fired himself from the gun deck of his flagship, the USS Miami, after which it retreated, having unlashed itself from the sunken Southfield. The Confederate ram was now in control of the Roanoke River. The ultimate destruction of a mighty ironclad. Ultimate destruction of the CSS Albemarle came at the hands of a young, brash Union naval hero named Lieutenant William Barker Cushing. On a night raid around 1:30 a.m. in October of 1864, he was successful in placing a bomb beneath her and sinking her while she was moored to a dock on the banks of the Roanoke River. Today, a gazebo marks where the ship was moored and ultimately sunk by Lieutenant Cushing. An officer of the United States Navy, Cushing is best known for sinking the ironclad Albemarle during a nighttime raid on October 27, 1864, a feat for which he received the thanks of Congress and a commemorative torpedo on display here in the museum. After Congress approved his daring raid, Cushing secured 2 steam launches. One was lost at sea during his voyage from New York to Norfolk to carry out the clandestine mission. The surviving launch was fitted with a 15-foot spar projecting into the water from its bow, which carried a lanyard-detonated torpedo. On the night of October 27, 1864, Cushing and his crew of 15 volunteers crept up the Roanoke in the dark, eluding enemy lookouts camped along the banks of the river. As the launch approached the Confederate docks of Plymouth, they came under heavy sentry fire from both the shore and aboard the Albemarle. As they closed in on the ship, they quickly discovered she was defended by floating log booms. After adjusting speed and angle, the steam launch rode up and then over them without difficulty. When her spar was fully against the ironclad's hull, Cushing stood up in the bow and detonated the torpedo's explosive charge. The explosion threw everyone aboard the steam launch into the water. Recovering quickly, Cushing stripped off his uniform and swam to shore, where he hid until daylight. Of the men in Cushing's boat, 1 escaped, 2 were drowned, and 11 were captured. Cushing's daring commando raid blew an immense hole in her midsection at the waterline. She sank immediately in the 6 feet of water below her keel, settling into the heavy mud bottom, leaving the upper armored casemate mostly dry. Not wanting the ironclad to fall back into Confederate hands, Union forces raised the Albemarle from the river bottom, patched up the hole left by the torpedo so that she was float-worthy, and floated her back down the Roanoke to a Union shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia, where her wooden superstructure and iron plating were dismantled and sold for scrap. The only 5 physical remains we have of the ship, 4 of which are here in the museum. The first is the bell over here. That's the original bell that was on the ship. Beside it is a shell from one of its Brooke rifle cannons. In the corner is a replica of the smokestack. The original can be seen there in Elizabeth City at the Museum of the Albemarle. And the 4th physical remains is in our far back room. It is a iron counterweight bar. And the 5th one is in Norfolk, Virginia. They managed to save one of the cannon. They didn't have it for scrap. So they have that out front. It's the NATO Museum, and the cannon is out front of that museum. So those are the 5 physical remains we have of the ship. And the recapture of Plymouth between April 17th and April 20th, 1864 was the last Confederate victory on land in the whole American Civil War. There were some other naval victories, but as far as land victories, Plymouth was the last one that the Confederates won. Without the success of the ironclad CSS Albemarle, the capture of Plymouth by Confederate General Hoke and the surrender of 2,800 Union troops would have been utterly impossible. After the ram sinking, it was impossible to hold Plymouth against the Union, so the Confederates withdrew and the Union forces again occupied Plymouth for the duration of the war. Lieutenant Cushing was rewarded by the federal government for his honorable deed of sinking the Albemarle, and he is described in the United States Naval Academy today as one of its greatest naval heroes.